Hello and welcome to Hammerheads. I'm Marcus Wilson and this is my partner in horror crime, Miles Watts.
Horror crime. Hello.
And we are looking at the BFI's list containing one great Hammer horror film indeed from every year, 1957 to 1974. And we've reached episode 7, and this is Kiss of the Vampire from 1963. And it's a lesser known title, Miles.
It is. Again, another one I haven't seen, so I think the ratio of films I've seen in this list of 17 is getting smaller and smaller. I think this is the 5th one I haven't seen out of the 7 that we've watched so far. Okay. So I didn't know it at all.
And this was released on 11th of September 1963, distributed by Rank in the UK, Universal in the US, and it's the 3rd vampire movie from Hammer after Dracula and Brides of Dracula. And again, missing Christopher Lee.
And I did miss Christopher Lee. And I always miss Christopher Lee when he's not in a vampire film, I have to say.
So a lesser known cast, and we can come on to that as well. But the screenplay itself was by producer Anthony Hines, writing under his pseudonym John Elder. And it seems to have been based on some of the stuff that they threw out for the previous film, the Brides of Dracula, but also sort of crossed with this 1947 novel called So Long at the Fair, which is written by Anthony Thorne. And that novel was actually then made into a movie directed by Terence Fisher later, and that starred Gene Simmons and Dirk Bogarde, so that could be worth a watch as well.
Not the Gene Simmons. No, of Kiss, I can't imagine. Although, he'd probably be quite good in a horror film, I should think. If he hasn't already. Probably showing my ignorance there. He probably has starred in horror films.
Yes, we're definitely into the swinging 60s now, aren't we, with this one?
Yeah, there's a marked difference in style, I think. Again, I didn't really know what to expect. And as it started, I sort of thought, okay, here we go. But I was wrong to think that, because all the filmmakers had deliberately said, let's do something a little different this time. If we're going to do another Dracula story, you're going to expect certain things to happen. And then Christopher Lee was in it. You'd expect him to come and charm the pants off everybody and then seduce the woman. And it's sort of not what happens.
And it sort of has, I think, the first of the films that we've seen which has a pre-credit sequence, which is quite macabre.
I thought that was brilliant. Do you know what? First of all, I'll say I think the director of photography is Alan Hume. I think his name was. Absolutely beautiful looking film. This from start to finish. It's got almost like a classic 60s horror. I mean, it's Eastman color, which they were experimenting with all these different film stocks in those days, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And that first scene in the cemetery, where they seem to be, putting someone to rest, and actually are stabbing her through the heart with a spade. That blood that comes out is that brilliant pinkish blood that they used to use. It was like oil paint, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it looked beautiful right from the start. I thought that first daytime, all of these things take place in the daytime. You can't really have a funeral scene at night unless it's Buffy, in which case they did do that once. But it was a great start to the film, very gothic.
We have a first-time Hammer participant, cinematographer Alan Hume, who would go on to work with Amicus, and you can kind of see a bit of that in the way the film looks. But also, he apparently went on to work on Return of the Jedi and 3 Bond films, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, and View to a Kill. So all with their own pre-credit sequences.
That's right, and
maybe slightly higher budget pre-credit sequences.
You definitely had a bit of money for Bond, didn't they? And as usual, I think Hammer probably had like the usual less than $1 million for this one, but made the most of it. I think they might have saved a bit of money with the actors. I don't know, but and then you have that fantastic full-blooded credit sequence, which is just terrific. And then the first scene is, I think this is the first Hammer film we've watched. That, and they make a point of mentioning it, where they haven't pulled up in a horse-drawn carriage to a creepy house. It's the first time. First of all, it's not nighttime; it's daytime. They've driven up in a motor car.
That's right. We're into industrialization.
Yeah, and a rather beautiful motor car actually. And the chap who plays Gerald is also in a Bond film. I think he plays Sheik in Spy Who Loved Me, I think. So there's another Bond connection there.
Oh, right. Okay. So this is Edward de Souza.
De Souza, that's it. Edward de Souza. So yeah, and he looks a bit like Raul Julia, I thought, in places.
Yeah. Because we've got this kind of honeymoon, a couple just married off on their honeymoon. Never seen that in a horror film. Gerald and Marianne, and they're the Harcourts, which seems to be a bit of a nod to Harker.
Yes, of course. I think again, like with Hammer does a very good job of, and they did this with Frankenstein, didn't they? Is they slightly go, let's do our version of it, because otherwise we might get into various kinds of trouble. But also, let's just put our own stamp on it. So yeah, Harcourt.
Yeah. So Dracula, we should say, isn't mentioned in the script.
No. But when he turns up, that actor, the first time you see him, I think he's reading a book, isn't he? He lowers the book, and I thought for a second, I didn't know Peter Cushing was in this, because I thought it was going to be Peter Cushing, and then it wasn't. It was the old chap. I'm forgetting everyone's name already.
Zimmer is the character's name.
Zimmer, that's it. Yeah,
Zimmer. This guy who played it is Clifford Evans. Evans, a Welsh actor, I believe. He was in Curse of the Werewolf.
Yes, of course he was. There's a few Welsh actors in this, which we'll come to, because one of them has a connection to my partner Vicky's family.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I can put you out of your misery now and just tell you.
Tell me. This is Marianne, is it?
Marianne Harcourt. Jennifer Daniel is the actress, and unfortunately she died about 5 years ago in her 80s, but she was born in Pontypool in Wales, and same as my father-in-law, and so she was friends with and neighbours to my girlfriend Vicky's grandparents. So they knew her growing up.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. And in fact, when I was down there a few years ago, they live in Sussex now, but when I was down there, they were saying, oh, yes, there was an actress called Jennifer Daniel who we used to know growing up, and she starred in a few things. I think she starred in horror films, and they were talking, because I make horror films, they were talking about them. And I read out the cast list today, and I went, oh, Jennifer Daniel, she's Welsh. And Vicky went, yeah, that's Nana's friend.
Wow, that's really impressive. That's the Welsh connection, that famous movie with William Friedkin directing.
Yes, well, yeah, not Gene Hackman in that one. It would have been, I suppose, Tony Hopkins in that one, wouldn't it? Move, get out of the area. Yeah.
So we've got Gerald and Marianne arriving on honeymoon, and Gerald is pretty clueless and manages to let the car tank run empty. And so they check into the Grand Hotel, of course, and room 13 is available.
Of course it is. Oh dear.
And this is where the similarity with the So Long at the Fair novel comes in, because that seems to have been about a brother and a sister who go to a French exhibition, and the brother seems to just disappear off the face of the earth, and his room turns into another room, and she's told, "Don't be crazy, you came here alone." And that's a very spooky bit of the film, isn't it?
I mean, the whole thing sort of has that eerie build-up of, usually Dracula would sort of appear or be mentioned, and you'd think, okay, well, the female lead is doomed. Because he's going to take an interest in her, and this had this very slow, and they could have almost called it a slow seduction, or because that's what it is. As soon as they get to the house, you've got this. Everyone's acting weird. Why are there dust sheets over everything? Where the housekeepers are acting weird, and then when they get there, and Zimmer and his son Carl and his daughter are there, and he's playing piano, and it's all very okay. And it's like, here, have a round of drinks, and it's all very. Suddenly it's intense. They're sitting there and they're being played piano to in a very intense way. And it's like, right. But when they get there, it's got that sort of, oh, you're strangers. Oh, that's okay then. You're hapless, unwitting strangers. And you think, why is that good? Why are you pleased that we're strangers?
I mean, there are lots of similarities to the Brides of Dracula plotline, really.
Yes, aren't there? It is like the Brides of Dracula, yeah.
It's sort of a bit of a remake.
It is, but I sort of like the fact that halfway through you kind of go, okay, well, what's going on? It's like Marianne's had this very slow seduction basically by Zimmer, and you sort of think, well, obviously he's the vampire. He's gonna hypnotize her, and she's hypnotizing, and the sort of twist that it's a big cult, and they're all in the sort of cult of the
This is sort
vampire.
of they're sort of the Ravener family, aren't they? They've kind of
Yes,
all kind of vampires, and they have
yes,
various hangers-on and disciples.
the family. Yeah, and I mean, that brilliant party scene where poor Gerald, they drug him and they sort of take Marianne off, and then he kind of wakes up like, what the hell happened? And then where's the party? And they've just as
What
soon as
party?
as soon as what party? As soon as he wakes up, as soon as he falls asleep because they drug him, they all just stop partying and just leave. It's so
Yeah,
creepy.
it's kind of all fun and games until someone gets the devil mask out.
Yeah, yeah, and I knew someone was going to collapse on that fantastic padded red chair by the door, because that's just a brilliant chair. I want that chair. I was very jealous of that chair.
I mean, it's definitely, as a film, influenced others. It feels very
Yes,
kind of Eyes Wide Shut,
I
or
was going to mention Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah, or
or
Rocky Horror as well.
Rocky Horror. I was thinking Rocky Horror, or even Society. I don't know if you've seen
Yes.
Society.
Oh, yes, I've
Brian
seen
Yuzna,
Society. I think I
1989.
watched it with you. I think we
Yeah,
watched Video Nasty that we watched in the early 90s. Yes, the shunting at the end, where everyone, oh my God, if you haven't seen Society and you've got a strong stomach, it's definitely good. It's a very satirical horror film about a cult of class, isn't it?
yeah, and the film is again a bit like Brides of Drac. It's very much that there's this upper class kind of malaise that's the whole
Yeah.
vampiric thing seems to be about kind of again the upper classes and feasting on not necessarily the lower classes in this case, but just anyone who happens to call for dinner.
Well, that's it. I think Gerald and Marianne are quite posh, aren't they? So they're not really, when they find out they've got a motor car, they go, "Oh, you must be wealthy." So they're not. Yes, it isn't about class. This one, it's just about. It did remind me of Eyes Wide Shut, because they say, give up your pointless endeavors, and just he's
Mm.
like, well, basically they say, no, what wife? You came by yourself, and he's like, oh God. But I did like that point of the film. I thought it sort of the first 40 minutes. They're only 90 minutes to all of these films, aren't they? The first 45 minutes were a good slow build, and the second half. I'm glad it did something different, because I thought, okay, we need more characters, we need more plot. So I'm glad that he goes off and decides to go with the beardy lad and make a plan to get the Harcourts. I mean the Zimmers, and so it sort of had a more interesting.
It's actually the Raveners, not the Zimmer is the drunken and Van Helsing stand-in.
Oh, that's right. Of course. Yeah, that's right. I should have paid more attention, shouldn't I? I was actually rather taken in by the visuals. I thought they were fantastic. I thought the sets looked great.
Yeah.
The exteriors were great. The props were brilliant. I thought it looked really good, like lavish production.
But I think they had a bit of unfortunate luck on the original scenes, because there's obviously all of these storm sequences which are obviously filmed on the sunniest day in midsummer.
I know. I didn't mind that so much, though,
shame.
because you could see all the lovely color, which is
Yeah.
probably not the point of the production. But yeah, I thought actually the scene in the graveyard where it's all the fog is drifting in as well. I thought that looked brilliant. I mean, we could have had some more of that, I guess. But no, it was beautiful.
Then it all gets it's sort of a movie of two halves, and the second half it gets all very sumptuous with the masked ball scene, and that's obviously it looks like an inspiration for Eyes Wide Shut, but apparently it was also an inspiration to Roman Polanski for the Fearless Vampire Killers in '67, the masked ball sequence.
Now that's a film I don't know very well, and I probably should check it out. I tend to know, you know what you know, don't you? I've watched half a dozen Polanskis. I think Rosemary's Baby, Repulsion, I think is my favorite Polanski. But yeah, I'm sort of glad they did something different with the second half. It felt like it could have gone very predictable. So halfway in, okay, she's had this slow luring into this vampire. Yeah, he's going to bite her. She's going to turn into a vampire. But I did like the fact that she's sitting at the piano and she's just completely transfixed by Carl's music, and then she's obviously taken in by the vampire. And at one point, he comes back and discovers her when it's all been thrown wide open, and says, "Stop looking at him! Stop looking at him! Look at me! Look at me, for God's sake!" And it's like it's the ultimate because of paranoid. It's like a couple of newlyweds, and the woman is completely hypnotized by another man and another thing. And, it's like every man's nightmare. The woman is completely just goes off her
Yeah.
husband and goes off with these bad people. So it is like Rocky Horror in that regard.
And the music's wonderful as well. The James
Mm,
Bernard again, doing
yeah.
all of that stuff. And we have a first time Hammer director in Don
Mm,
Sharp. We
yeah.
don't. It's not Terence Fisher this time. So Don Sharp's an Australian movie director, and apparently he'd never seen a horror film before being
No.
asked by Anthony Hines to direct this.
I always like that as well because sometimes you get non-genre directors
Mm,
directing horror and they do such a good job because obviously they treat it as it's just a movie, it's a story.
yeah,
And I think when he got into it, Sharp was kind of like, well, I can really appreciate the aesthetic of this. And he said he really enjoyed making the film.
yeah. He
Uh,
said
it,
Tony Hines was the best producer he'd ever worked with.
yeah, which is nice, isn't it? So I don't know what else I did look up Don Sharp. Now I've forgotten what else he did.
He did another movie. He did Rasputin and Mad Monk for Hammer a few years later, but then he went on
Yes.
to direct Amicus because he enjoyed the horror genre so much.
That's really nice, isn't it? When people stay for the they stay for the genre.
Come for the vampire,
Um,
stay for the genre.
that's it. Yeah. Yeah, I thought he did a fantastic job. Actually, I thought it was nicely directed, nicely staged, some really nice camera moves, and it just looked brilliant. The film stock they used is very nice, um,
Yeah.
just very vivid and rich, and all those lovely reds and browns and
Yes. Now we should talk about the denouement, the final scene.
yes.
Yeah.
Now I understand Peter Cushing nixed this scene for Brides of Dracula because he didn't want Van Helsing to be into black magic.
Yeah, he thought that the Van Helsing shouldn't be using black magic because that was too sort of playing vampires at their own game, but instead we
Yes,
have this Zimmer who's the more drunken and debauched vampire slayer. So
yes.
there's pentagrams and magic potions and all kinds of things that I think we'll probably see more of during the 60s.
Yeah, and I love that stained glass, circular stained glass window she sits
Yeah.
in front of on the throne. But which film was it? Was it Brides of Dracula where the horrible rubber bat comes in at the end and it was just the worst thing we've ever seen? And
Yes.
they completely doubled down on that at the end of this film, didn't they? I mean, how many rubber bats did they have? About 50.
Apparently they were bought from a local branch of Woolworths.
Yes, it looks like it. Yes. I think that, you'd think they would have learned their lesson. It's like, well, okay, that was one bat and it drew too much attention to itself. And it's like, let's get 50 of them. I preferred the animation, actually. The animation was quite gothic and stylized when they were flocking up in the matte painting all the way up to the castle. But, when they're coming in through the window, they're literally just floating in front of people's faces, all rubbery.
Yeah, I mean the whole film feels a bit like dream-like, but that
Yes.
it sort of doesn't feel as though that last sequence fits at all with what comes before it in the film.
No, it's a little bit
Sadly.
throws you out a little bit, but I don't, a couple of reviews I saw at the time said that it completely derails itself in the last 10 minutes, but I don't think it does that much damage. I just think it's a bit cheesy.
Yeah,
I do like the fact that the final act, the final 20 minutes has Gerald and Zimmer making this plan. Let's go in there and just kick their asses and they get
yeah,
Marianne back. And that was quite satisfying. Um, but there was some silly bits in the middle, I think. But it was, as a production, I thought it was really nice, actually.
I believe it had to be postponed in the US, the release, because they didn't want comparisons made with Hitchcock's The Birds that was released in the same year.
Is that true?
Yeah,
It's
because
nothing,
of
and
that
it's
final
nothing
scene.
like the birds. Oh my
Well,
God.
just that last scene, I guess.
Boy, oh boy. I mean, it's really nothing like I mean, some bats coming through the window, but that's about
Yeah,
it. If you
yeah.
want to compare it to the birds, it comes off quite poorly in that regard, I think, because the birds is like one of the best horror films ever made. But yeah, they delayed it by a year, and then there was a TV version which they had to cut loads for telly, and they had to
Yes.
they cut so much out of it apparently that they had to film extra scenes
All
because they'd
right.
cut some of the sex and gore. So they had to film extra scenes for random stuff, which is really puritanical and very funny. Imagine spending the money to shoot 10 minutes extra of the movie because you didn't want to show the naughty bits.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I assume that Hammer thought that they were well known and respected enough by this stage
Mm,
to introduce this quite unknown cast. I mean, most of the
yeah.
actors and actresses weren't big names. I mean, we have Jackie Wallace, who's Sabina Ravner, the daughter.
And she was pretty good. Yeah.
I think it's her only credited feature film role, and
I thought she was very good when she was of the vampire and she was trying to seduce Gerald. She was very good in that scene. That was her. So, and then he rejects her, and that was quite well done, I think. Um,
yes,
but yeah, again, I think it's interesting. I totally see where they're right. It's our third vampire movie. We're not going to Lee and Cushing. We're not going to have all the same people in it. And so they did the very wise thing of changing the story, getting these actors and just changing the production so it feels like a different film. But I am by now starting to miss, and I'm thankful that we're coming back to a couple of Peter Cushing movies, because to me, I mean, again, you shouldn't just say Hammer films is Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, because it's not. There's a lot more to Hammer films than that, but they are the flagship members of the cast, aren't they? Let's face it. So I know, in the next couple of films, at least we've got Peter Cushing back.
I do enjoy a film with lesser known actors. Then I'm not
Yeah.
kind of always thinking about the actor and the actress. It's I can sort of sit back and just
Yes.
go with the craziness of the plot and the premise. But
Yeah, and we know why Christopher Lee didn't want to keep doing this. He didn't want to get
yeah,
typecast as Dracula, and he got quite narky about it later in life, didn't he? He's like,
yes, that ship had already sailed.
yes, exactly. Yeah, so I can understand why they didn't. And yeah, of course, but when we know that when you do cast Peter Cushing or Christopher Lee, they're so versatile. They can play any character and make it different. But I think some people see Christopher Lee as Dracula and they see Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, and they just think it all blurs together and they think it's always the same performance. So yeah, for me, again, it's interesting to see new actors I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, well, I thought it was a very strong movie.
Yeah, it
And
was.
lesser known, but well worth a watch.
Yeah, it was like, was it better than Brides of Dracula? I would put it maybe on a par with Brides of Dracula. Just had different.
I preferred Dry Brides of just slightly preferred Brides
Yeah,
of Dracula.
maybe. I mean, they've all been good. Considering we've watched 7 movies, we haven't watched a shaky one yet. And the aspects of some of these, obviously, they are low budget films. There's going to be 1 or 2 scenes that are unintentionally funny. But this one, like I say, it was very lavish, yeah, and it was very well. It was a very well made film. You can't really fault it, apart from the rubber bats, but we'll let that go. Even Jaws had a crap shark, but you can't really fault it. So I think it was a good, solid one. But I think I know that going forward, we're going on to some non-vampire, we're going to have different monsters coming up soon, and I think it's like I'm ready for it.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what the latter half of the 60s is Hammer's gonna be doing. So we're in familiar hands next time. The Gorgon, 1964, directed by Terence Fisher, and reintroducing Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
No, they're both in it. Nice.
Peter Lee and
Peter Lee.
Cushing. Peter Lee, that's a place in the northeast of England.
Peter Lee, it is. You're right. And this one is going to be it's a Greek tale, isn't it? The Gorgon.
Yes, Greek mythology.
So that would be very interesting. Again, I think Hammer were probably after this many years going, right, what can we do next? I think they probably got Lee and Cushing back because it wasn't vampires.
That's a good point. Yeah. That is a good point.
Even though we've enjoyed them, I think if next episode was another vampire one, we'd be like, are we doing too many vampires, Hammer? Are we? Should we just do something else? Because I know coming up we've got all kinds of creatures, zombies, and loads of stuff. But yeah, I would give this one a good recommendation actually. And also, I've got to mention, I love the poster.
Yes.
I thought that the sort of classic poster that's on IMDb for
artwork, yeah.
Beautiful artwork. Like I can't remember the artist, but it's beautifully done, and the layout and the colors and the style is brilliant. So go check that out as well.
Cool.
And also, Edward de Souza, I think, is still alive, isn't he?
I believe he is. He did I believe did one of the DVD extras, I think, for the Phantom of the Opera the other week.
Yeah, of course. And he's 95, I think, which is pretty amazing.
And another interesting fun fact, Barry Warren, who plays Carl Ravner, the son of the main vampire, apparently the actress Sarah Miles wrote in her biography that before dying in 1994, Barry Warren, the actor, had a sex change operation and lived for 5 years as Claire Warren.
Oh, I see. Good for him. Yeah.
Way back in 1994.
Yeah. You don't think of that kind of thing with these kind of movies for some reason. But of course, it's not a new thing. And there's lots of cases of this kind of thing where you think, oh, yeah, I remember them as someone else. But of course, you don't want to dead name them or, but yeah, a few composers as well were transitioned as well. A few horror composers.
Okay.
Quite an interesting history, which I won't go into now, but it's, yeah. Great. Well, look, I really enjoyed that film, and I am looking forward to the Gorgon, which another one I haven't seen.
Me too.
I might just admit I've seen about 3 of these 17 movies. I think as someone, I mean, this is partly why we did it, because it's a huge gap in my Hammer watching, but
totally, we've probably seen the same Hammer movies like about 20 times.
We probably have. Yeah, Dracula, everyone's seen Dracula, but the Gorgon is one, and now can't remember, but if anyone's listening to this who remembers saying to me the Gorgon is one of their favorites, it might have been Stephen, actually. Stephen Mosley.
Yeah.
I think he said, oh, the Gorgon is possibly my favorite, because I know our friend Andy Stanton, who we should get on in a future episode, his favorite is one towards the end of the run, I think. And there's also The Devil Rides Out. Basically, each episode of each film has got its fans in this list of this that we're doing, and they come forward and say, can I be on that one? So yes
you can all be on.
We'll have guests in the future, but we were enjoying these, but I think next week it's just the 2 of us again.
Okay, well, grand. Well, yes, I hope you have enjoyed, and I hope if you haven't seen this particular one, you'll watch it. Subscribe, like the podcast, and we'll see you next time round.
I thought you were going to say subscribe like the ravening hordes that you are. In which case, do that too.
Do that too. See you next time.
Bye-bye.